All right, you asshats, buckle up, because today we're going deep into the UK's National Health Service.
The NHS?
Yeah, the NHS, the one Americans love to bitch about without actually knowing how it works.
Yeah.
You, my friend, want to know more.
Yeah.
And luckily for you, we've got an expert here to break it all down.
Right. The NHS is the UK's attempt to provide health care to every resident. Of England who lives in England permanently. And it's free at the point of use. So when you use it, it's free. It's paid for through taxes.
Okay, hold up. Free health care. Come on, now. You think we were born yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
What's the catch? Are we talking like Robin Hood shit where they're stealing from the rich to pay for everyone bunions and shit?
No, it's not about stealing. Everyone chips in through their taxes.
Yeah.
And everyone benefits from that.
Okay.
It's kind of like a big potluck. You bring a dish to the potluck, and you get to eat everything on the table.
All right, so no highway robbery.
No.
But what about those horror stories? The ones where you break a nail and have to wait 6 months to see a doctor?
There's some truth to that. The NHS is built to handle emergencies first. So if you have a heart attack, you're going straight in. Right. If you've got a wonky nail, you might be waiting.
So basically, if your ass is on fire, they'll put it out.
Yeah.
But if you got a sniffle, you better stock up on tissues.
It's about managing resources and making sure those in most need are treated first.
Makes sense.
It's not a perfect system by any means, and the wait times are a problem.
Okay. Let's talk about gatekeepers.
Yeah.
I hear that these GPs,
General practitioners,
are like the bouncers at a fancy club.
Yeah.
You need a permission slip just to get in and see a specialist? What's up with that?
It's not about being a bouncer. It's about streamlining the process. So your GP is your first point of contact. They assess your needs, and if they think it's necessary, they refer you to a specialist.
So you can't just like stroll in demanding a heart bypass because you've been eating donuts for a decade.
Exactly.
You got to go through the GP first.
Make sure the specialists aren't wasting their time with things that a GP could handle.
Right, so they're like a filter.
Yeah, like triage.
Makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
But what about choice? Can you pick your own doctor, your own hospital, or do you just get whatever the NHS throws at you?
You technically have a choice between public and private.
Okay.
But, and this is a big but, the NHS will only pay for private care if it meets their standards and it's within their budget.
So basically, unless you're loaded, you're stuck with whatever the NHS gives you.
It does limit choices.
Yeah.
Particularly for those who can't afford to go private.
Right.
It's one of the trade-offs of having universal health care.
All right. So if the NHS is so great, why do some people go private? Are they just a bunch of rich snobs who hate waiting in line with the rest of us?
There are a few reasons. Sometimes it's about speed. If you're facing a long wait for something non-urgent, going private can get you seen faster.
So it's like paying to skip the line at Disneyland.
Pretty much.
Makes sense.
Some people also believe that private care offers more comfort or personalized attention.
So they want a butler serving them grapes while they're getting a colonoscopy?
Private hospitals often have more amenities
Okay.
that you might not find in a public hospital, like a private room or better food.
Right.
It's not always about luxury, but it can be a factor.
Let's be real, though. Most people can't afford that shit. It's like a two-tiered system, one for the rich and one for the rest of it.
It's a valid concern.
Right.
There's an ongoing debate about whether private health care undermines the NHS
Right.
and increases inequality.
Okay, hold on a minute. Isn't private healthcare supposed to be like this perfect, shiny alternative?
Yeah.
The golden goose of healthcare.
Not necessarily. In 2018, the Care Quality Commission,
Okay.
that's like the watchdog for healthcare in England, they released a report that showed some pretty serious issues in private hospitals. It turned out that many of them weren't prepared for emergencies and had some pretty lax safety procedures.
Wait, so you're telling me that private healthcare,
Uh,
the supposed savior of British healthcare, is just as fucked up as the public system?
It's not about being fucked up. Both systems have their pros and cons. The NHS offers universal coverage and basic care, but it can be slow. Private healthcare is faster.
Right.
And gives you more choices, but it's expensive and not always safer.
So you're saying it's a pick-your-poison situation, no matter what, you're screwed.
That's a bit dramatic.
Okay.
The takeaway is that there is no perfect healthcare system. Every country has its own challenges.
Right.
And what works best depends on their priorities.
All right, that's a fair point. But this brings up a question for our listener who's probably thinking, should I be kissing the ground and thanking my lucky stars for American healthcare?
Yeah.
Warts and all. I mean, if the public system has long waits and the private sector has safety issues, what does that say about healthcare in England overall?
It's more nuanced than just saying healthcare in England is screwed. Each system has its baggage.
Okay.
And the NHS is no exception.
Right, fine. Let's not bum out our listeners too much.
Yeah.
But seriously, what kind of shit is the NHS dealing with these days? Besides the whole waiting for a hip replacement like it's the new iPhone thing?
Funding is a huge one. The NHS is massive. Keeping it running smoothly takes a lot of money.
Well, no shit. It's like trying to feed a small country on a McDonald's budget.
The demands on the NHS keep on growing. People are living longer. Treatments are becoming more advanced and more expensive.
Right. So more old people, fancier treatments, less money to go around.
Exactly.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
The government is always trying to find ways to do more with less, but it's an uphill battle.
Let's get real for a sec. Are we talking about rationing health care? Like back in the war when you got your 2 aspirin a month and that was it?
It's not that drastic.
Okay.
But there are serious conversations about how to decide who gets what treatment and how to make sure everyone gets the care they need without bankrupting the country.
Okay, let's lighten the mood a bit. What about these royal colleges and medical associations? Are those just a bunch of old dudes in powdered wigs drinking tea and talking about the good old days? Or do they actually do something?
They're actually crucial to how healthcare works in England. Take the royal colleges, like the Royal College of Physicians or the Royal College of Surgeons.
Okay.
They set the standards for how doctors are trained and how they practice medicine.
So they're like the quality control guys,
Yeah.
making sure the doctors know their shit before they're let loose on patients.
Exactly. They design the curriculum for medical schools,
Right.
run the exams, and give out certifications to make sure the doctors are competent.
Okay, makes sense. I wouldn't want some dude who learned surgery from watching YouTube to be operating on me.
And then you have the medical associations, like the British Medical Association.
Yeah.
They're more like a union for doctors,
Right.
lobbying the government on healthcare policies and providing support to their members.
So they're fighting for better pay,
Eh.
better working conditions, maybe a free toaster oven with every membership.
It's more about advocating for doctors and helping shape how healthcare is run.
Right. Okay, so you've laid it all out for us. The good, the bad, and the ugly. What about the future? Is the NHS going to survive this, or is it going to collapse under the weight of all of its problems? What's your prediction?
It's impossible to say for sure what the future holds, but the NHS has been around for a long time. It's weathered a lot of storms.
So you're saying it's like a cockroach. You can't kill it even if you try.
It's more that the NHS is deeply ingrained in British society.
Okay.
People are proud of it, and they want to see it succeed.
Right. Well, that's a good thing, I guess. As long as they can keep the lights on and the doctors from quitting.
There are definitely challenges ahead, but I'm cautiously optimistic. It'll take some creative thinking and a willingness to adapt, but I think the NHS can evolve and continue to provide health care for everyone.
All right. You heard it here first, folks. The NHS might just live to see another day. But let's shift gears a bit. Earlier you mentioned resource allocation and how tough it is to decide who gets what. Can you break that down for our listener a bit more? How does the NHS actually decide who gets treated first and what treatments they'll cover? What factors go into those decisions?
That's a really important question. And it gets to the heart of some ethical dilemmas the NHS faces. When resources are limited, tough choices have to be made.
Yeah. No one wants to be the one deciding who gets a life-saving treatment and who doesn't.
Yeah.
So how do they handle that? Do they just like draw names out of a hat?
It's much more complex than that. There are established guidelines and frameworks that help clinicians make these difficult decisions.
Okay. But what are those guidelines based on? How do they weigh different needs and decide which ones are more urgent or important?
One of the key principles is clinical need. It's about prioritizing those who are most likely to benefit from treatment and those whose conditions are most severe or life-threatening.
So if you're about to kick the bucket, you jump to the front of the line?
It's not always that straightforward. There's also the concept of cost effectiveness.
Okay.
They have to consider the cost of a treatment compared to the benefit it provides.
So a cheap treatment that helps a lot of people might get priority over an expensive treatment that only helps a few.
That's the general idea. But it's not just about numbers. They also have to consider the quality of life a treatment might provide.
So if a treatment can give someone a few more years of life, but those years are going to be filled with pain and suffering, they might decide it's not worth it.
It's about finding a balance between extending life and ensuring a decent quality of life. It's a delicate balancing act, and there are often no easy answers.
Damn, this is getting heavy. Let's take a quick break and come back to this whole resource allocation thing later. I need a drink. All right, we're back, and hopefully you've topped off your drinks, because this shit's about to get deep again. We were talking about how the NHS decides who gets what when it comes to treatment, and let's be honest, that's the kind of conversation that can send you spiraling into an existential crisis.
It's definitely complex, and there are a lot of factors at play. But one thing that's often overlooked is the role of the patients themselves.
Hold on. You mean it's not just some faceless bureaucrat in a tiny office deciding my fate?
Not at all. Shared decision-making is a fundamental principle of the NHS. Patients should be active participants in their own care, working with their doctors to choose the best treatment options for their needs.
So it's not just like, take this pill and shut up. I actually get a say in what happens to me.
Absolutely. Doctors are there to provide information and guidance, but ultimately it's the patient who decides what treatment they're comfortable with, what risks they're willing to take, and what aligns with their overall goals and values.
That's refreshing, at least in theory.
Yeah.
But let's be real. How much power does a patient actually have when they're facing a serious illness and the doctor's throwing around all sorts of medical jargon?
It's a valid concern. There's definitely a power imbalance in those situations, but that's where good communication and patient advocacy come in.
So it's on the patient to ask questions, do their own research,
Yeah.
make sure they understand what the hell is going on.
Exactly. And if they're not comfortable advocating for themselves, they can always bring a family member or a friend to their appointments for support.
Okay, I can see how that could work. But let's get back to the nuts and bolts of the NHS. You mentioned medical schools earlier. What's the deal with those? Are we talking about a bunch of posh kids with daddy's money strutting around like they own the place?
That's a stereotype that just doesn't hold up. Medical schools in England are actually quite diverse. They attract students from all walks of life, and the selection process is very rigorous. It's not just about grades. They're looking for well-rounded individuals with empathy, good communication skills, and a genuine desire to help others.
So it's not just about being a brainiac.
Yeah.
You got to actually give a shit about people.
Of course. Being a good doctor requires more than just book smarts. It's about connecting with patients, understanding their concerns, and treating them with respect and dignity.
I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Yeah.
It seems like the NHS is all about balancing these different factors. Clinical need, cost effectiveness, patient choice, quality of life. Is that the big takeaway?
You've hit the nail on the head. The NHS is a complex system that's constantly trying to strike the right balance between all these competing priorities. There's no easy answer, and it's a constant evolution. But fundamentally, it's about providing quality healthcare that's accessible to everyone regardless of their background or their income.
That's a pretty noble goal. And if they can pull it off, more power to them.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who've been patiently absorbing all this NHS knowledge, what's the one thing you want them to walk away with? The aha moment, so to speak.
Think of it this way. The NHS is like this giant, messy, complicated experiment. It's got its flaws, for sure, but it's also trying to do something incredibly ambitious. Provide healthcare as a right, not a privilege. It's a work in progress, and it's always going to face new challenges. But it's a system worth paying attention to because it offers valuable lessons for any country struggling with healthcare reform.
There you have it, folks. The NHS in a nutshell. Messy and perfect, but aiming for something truly important. And who knows, maybe we can learn a thing or two from them. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're going to go find a pub and raise a glass to universal health care. Cheers. Okay, so we're back talking about how the NHS decides who gets treatment first, and it's a pretty heavy topic.
It is complex, but one thing people forget is that patients have more power than they realize.
You mean it's not just some random pencil pusher deciding my fate?
Not at all.
No.
Shared decision-making is a core part of the NHS. Patients should be involved in their own care, working with doctors to choose the best option for them.
So it's not just take this pill and shut up. I actually get a say.
You do. Doctors are there to give you info and guide you, but ultimately it's your decision what treatment you want and what risks you'll take.
Okay, that's good in theory. But let's be real. How much power does a patient really have when they're facing a serious illness and the doctor's using a bunch of fancy medical words they don't understand?
That's a good point. There can be a power imbalance. But that's where good communication and being your own advocate are important.
So it's up to me to ask questions, do my own research, and make sure I understand what's going on.
Exactly. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that yourself, bring a friend or family member to your appointments for support.
Okay, I can see that working. But let's get back to the NHS itself. You mentioned medical schools before. What are those like? Are we talking about a bunch of rich kids strutting around like they own the place?
That's a stereotype that isn't really true. Medical schools in England are actually quite diverse. They have students from all walks of life, and it's hard to get in. It's not just about grades. They want people who are empathetic, good communicators, and really want to help others.
So you're saying it's not just about being a brainiac. You have to actually give a damn about people.
Being a good doctor takes more than just being smart. It's about connecting with patients, understanding them, and treating them with respect.
All right, I'm seeing a theme here. The NHS is all about balance. Clinical need, cost effectiveness, patient choice, quality of life.
Yeah.
That's the main point.
Got it. The NHS is a big system trying to find that sweet spot between all those things. It's not easy and things are always changing. But the goal is good quality health care that anyone can get no matter who they are or how much money they have.
That's a good goal. I hope they can make it work. So for our listeners who have been hanging in there learning about the NHS, what's the one thing you want them to remember?
The NHS is like this giant, messy experiment with some good ideas. It's not perfect, but it's trying to make healthcare a right, not a privilege. It's a work in progress, but it's worth paying attention to because other countries can learn from it.
All right, folks. There you have it, the NHS. Messy, imperfect, but trying to do something good. And hey, maybe the U.S. can learn a thing or two from them. That's it for us this week. We're out of here.